King Alfred or X84. Once all melanites behind cage doors, in front of the idiot box, drinking cores, watching sports. At the picnic, first in line for porks. Can't find your mind, some say that it's lost. Moorish science says divine souls got tossed, abandoned. Love is my ammo, peace is the cannon. Truth is the ayahuasca talking to the shaman. Freedom is the freedom, justice I must get. Tears fall like those shot with the pilgrims' muskets. The ruckus I bring, but this ain't Wu-Tang. Hold you accountable, Shimitar takes your 2 hands. Sent up the frankincense from Sudan. Big up to my elder and the god Moses holding up Mooban. Rainbow flag rapping Fruity Loop 2 cans. Same company got cola in 2 cans. Different labels, you're navigating, L is your navel. Make sure I cruise, watch the goddess not cable. My property, now the rights of the archives papal. Ex-knights, now sheiks of the round table. Ancients return to reclaim and learn how to not to succumb to the combustion burn. Astral projecting, as above so below, so you know off the cosmos we're reflecting. Yo bro, laws of nature, make the sun hate you. Hybrid cockazoid, I'm all pro but not rapanoid. My deep mob, make devil's horns kebab. Don't get my Islam twisted with jihad. Don't get the Muslim mixed up with Muslims. Don't mistake the Mufti force for hoodlums. We giving back Islam and his story. Taking my story, creating a mystery. That's what's hidden. It's not called Satanism. Men thinking they're wise, but they lack wisdom. Need I say more? In my proper person, I got judges tearing up the bonds and cursing. I self-law a master. No guns, let God be whirlwind blast ya. No need for tabs, we got the feds. Rituals make them roll down the steps like the Aztec heads. I self-law a master. Let no guns, let God be whirlwind blast ya. No need for tabs, we got the feds. Rituals make them roll down steps like Aztec heads. More say they're ready for consciousness, I doubt it. Application is the path, but some reroute it. The most I can say is, we'll see about it. Mother Nature sets fires and they can't out it. They take oaths, I know the truth, but they can't shout it. I plant the seed in your mind, got the highest sprouting. Just like Jack's beans, roll a stalk of sensi seed. Empty ashtray, hanging from the loose kente. Bobo beating on the djembe, calling Orishas. Or hailing Goddess Renan or the Negas. Red, black, green candles, golden flame. Make you think so much and end up with a swollen brain. Cause even she can see that he's in create her. The point creatress is the only creator. I self-law and master. My son now run, my birthright's a sovereign. God macabre, around me revolving. X-Alpha or David Starr, I'm shooting at your squadron. Illuminate my higher self, see from afar. I'm so against jail, I can't rhyme in bars. Tell them I self-law and master. No guns, let God be whirlwind blast ya. No need for tabs, we got the feds. Rituals make them roll down the steps like the Aztec heads. I self-law and master. No guns, let God be whirlwind blast ya. No need for tabs, we got the feds. Rituals make them roll down steps like Aztec heads. 5 on the left, 2 on the right. Artist Union. Conscious. Artist Union. I self-law a master. Whirlwind blast ya. We got the feds. Aztec heads. I see.
Islam, Islam, Islam. Welcome to Moor's Heritage and History School Circle of Readers. This is RVBey, but guess what? We are reading the very last chapter of White Cargo, and guess who's on the line to get a chance that we wanted her to have for certain to read the last chapter. Sister Anna Ill. Peace, sister. I know you're there.
Peace.
All right. How
are you?
We can hear you.
All right. All right. Good.
We can hear you well. Yeah, I know you're in a new spot and all that like that, so you got to test it out. But you sound well. Can you hear us all right?
Yes.
Are you feeling, huh?
Yeah, I can hear you.
All right. Are you feeling up to reading this chapter, or Would you like for me to start it? And are you feeling up to reading the chapter?
No, I can read it. It's really short. I was trying to read the previous chapter, but I'll just have to do that later, and maybe we can talk about that.
Oh, yes, that was a very good chapter.
Next week.
You said you can talk about it when?
I said maybe we can talk about the book on a whole on our next circle of readers.
Oh, all right. That would be great.
Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah, because there was a lot of information. There was a lot of information covered in the entire. So maybe it would be good to, kind of round it all up and have a discussion on the book in its entire, especially that last chapter.
The last one we just read, 18.
Yeah, chapter 18. That's, there's some things in there that I want to see if I can find, like the Act of Parliament passed in 1717. I want to see if I can find that act. And then the War of Spanish Succession of 1714. I want to find that and see what that was about. And there's other things that were mentioned in there that I want to find about a lot of these acts. Is that you still can find. So the one that I think is absolutely being acted on even today is the Act of Parliament of 1717, and it was entitled an Act for the further preventing robbery, burglary, and other felonies. Actually, was just a nice way of saying we're going to round everybody up and transport them to, what did they call them? His Majesty's American colony. Yeah, which is just another way of saying we're going to supply unemployed labor for companies. All right. Which is basically what they're doing now, especially with the whole prison industry. That's all over again, only in a different way. But the last chapter is 19, and it's entitled "The Last Hurrah." So let me.
All right. Let's go.
Yeah.
Let the reading begin.
So, chapter 19, The Last Hurrah. With the surrender of the British Army at Yorktown in 1781, colonial era was over, and so one might have imagined what the American role had been done for Britain's convicts. American courts had turned away British convict ships at the start of the war. It was surely inconceivable that the new nation, United States of America, proudly independent, would ever allow a single British convict in again. However, in the summer of 1783, as British and American envoys were meeting at the Palace of Versailles to put the final touches to the peace treaty ending the war, an extraordinary plot was hatched in London. Men involved planned to smuggle convicts into the United States, using them as ordinary migrants. They persuaded themselves that if the Americans found out, they might ever come to welcome the traitors. The plotters weren't irresponsible freebooters or impetuous young bloods. They were headed by the joint leader of Britain's coalition government, Lord North, who had presided over many of the misjudgments that led to the end of British rule in America. Other ministers in the coalition were behind him. And when the king delighted the court, this desperate venture was triggered by fears of the crime wave expected after the mass dismobilization of troops when the peace was signed. It was recognized that the Gaul would not be able to cope, as we have seen after every major war. The prison crisis loomed when ex-soldiers, 6 cents-a-day heroes, returned home. Signs of crisis developed even while the war was raging. During the 6 years of conflict, safety valve, transportation to America had been jammed shut. Well before the war ended, prison overcrowding became acute. The prison had to accommodate almost 1,000 extra inmates a year who had formerly been transported. Everywhere, prisons began to burst at the seams. In 5 years, new regulations doubled. The wretched inadequacy of Britain's prison was laid bare by the penal reformer John Howard. He shook England with its monumental study of prison system. He had inspected several hundred cells and presented a picture of disease, corruption, and cruelty in cramped and fetid buildings. There were prisoners in windowless cells taking turns to breathe at tiny ventilation holes in medieval dungeons where food was dropped through grates and ceilings. Prisoners knee deep in water. Prisoners chained on their backs to the floor. And sick prisoners left unattended to die. Howard reported that vast numbers of convicts perished from smallpox, chlorella, and gold fever. He was especially concerned about this type of typhoid and estimated that more convicts died from it each year than the total number. The most shocking part of it was that infection was endemic in Britain's prisons and Britain alone. Howard's researches had taken him to go in most corners of Western Europe, only the Bastille wouldn't allow him in, and in none had he found gold fever. Contrasting the prisons of Europe and England, Howard said he was put to the blush for end for my native country. The Crown solution to new rights prison ship. The 1776 Hope Act authorized felons to be lodged in Hull or prison ships on Spain. This be on their way again, but the Hopes were to be a feature of British life for 80 years. Country's leading convict contractor, Duncan Campbell, secured the contract for the first Hope. Campbell was a merchant with extensive sugar interests in Jamaica who had handled all convict transportation from London and the home county for the previous 6 years. India, which Campbell had employed shipping convicts to America and his sugar back to the return voyage. He anchored the ship in the Thames at Galleon Reach, Woolwich, and Big Master. Her landward portals were blocked and her lower deck converted to house 130 chain convicts. The Hope Act laid down that they foreshore around what became Woolwich Arsenal. As soon as war began, both also became Britain's chosen solution to the problem of housing prisoners of war in America. Decommissioned ships moored in the British Navy base in New York Wallabout Bay held thousands of American, French, and Spanish prisoners. Some 11,500 men are said to have commemorated in the prison ship martyrs monument, standing 149 feet high in Fort Greene Park. In England, the first batch of 80 felons brought from Newgate climbed aboard the Justitia in August 1776. A year later, Campbell was commissioned to operate a second hulk at Woolwich, and later a third there, the Censor. He would also be contracted to operate hulks in Plymouth and Portsmouth. The press would label them Campbell's Academics of Crime. People were in turn fascinated, horrified, and frightened by the floating prison. At first, Justitia was a tourist attraction. Crowds flocked to Woolwich to watch the prisoners laboring on the foreshore. Most prison inmates of the time were described as ruckus and intimidating. Not so the convicts from the Hull. The Scots magazine ran a story depicting the men as miserable wretches, utterly proud. So far from being permitted to speak to anyone, they hardly dared speak to one another. The men wore fetters on each leg that were tied to the waist or throat. They labored silently from dawn till dusk. Londoners brought up on the comforting refrain from Rule Britannia that Britons never, never, never will be slaves, now saw Englishmen in chains used as slaves. As the historian Dan Barnes puts it, the English was invited to watch at home what their transports did in the colony. The sight was a jolt. The London magazine called the sight of an Englishman transformed into a galley slave humiliating. What sightseers were witnessing was the mirror of what had been happening to blacks and whites sold by British merchants to toil in American plantations for 170 years until Campbell built a wall to block the view. Campbell would have preferred to hide the fact that the hulks were death traps. But just 2 months after the first convicts came aboard the Justitia, John Howard came calling. He depicted the prisoners as half-clothed, cold, and badly underfed, and called the condition alarming. Convicts couldn't use the hammocks provided because of the weight of their chains. John Howard's findings prompted a parliamentary inquiry. This revealed that in the first 18 months, out of a total of 632 convicts deposited on the hulk, 176 died. The mortality rate was even higher subsequently. In the winter of 1778-9, convicts on the Censor and Justitia were dying at a rate of more than 20 a month. The sight and smell of the hulks were daily reminders of the crisis. Hulk after hulk hung with bedding, clothes, weed, and rotting rigging lined the river like a floating shanty town. Although portholes on the shore side of each hulk were blocked, as were the hatches, the stink is said to have carried 100 yards. Pressure to do something was coming from all sides. All our goals are overglutted, declared Edmund Burke. Half the British Navy converted into Justitia galleys would scarce suffice to contain all our English penitents. In January 1783, matters were desperate. A frightening memorandum was sent to Lord North containing a warning from the keepers of London's gold. Unless overcrowding was tackled, the consequences may be fatal not only for the persons confined, but also to the people of the town. A subsequent memorandum records that their lordships, the government, agreed it was highly important to resolve the problem of the great number of convicts in Newgate and settle questions of transportation to America. A few months later, Lord North's secret plot was hatched. It coincided dangerously with the delicate last stages of the peace talks and Versailles between Britain and the United States and her European allies. North secured the services of an ambitious risk-taker, the London merchant George Moor. Moore was willing to take a first shipment of nearly 150 convicts and tried to sell them in America for a government payment of £500. Much later in the game, Moore would ask for twice the price, but in the early stages, he was convinced that he was on to a good thing. His plan was to pass off the convicts as innocent migrants, as indentured servants. Moore's contact in America was an influential Baltimore merchant, George Salmon, who had previously imported Irish convicts into Maryland. Salmon was bullish about the prospect. I don't know anything would bring more money here, he wrote, than a parcel of servants or convicts, which was formerly a good business. The two merchants planned an elaborate subterfuge with false trails, switched destinations, changed courses, and the renaming of the ship, as well as the £500 they were to keep whatever profits came from selling the convicts as servants. What they proposed was not illegal. No ban on convicts had yet been imposed in Maryland. Salmon and Moore assumed they could sell quite a number of convicts before any ban could be imposed. Salmon was also confident of buying off other influential men in Maryland. He would distribute porter and cheese among friends in the assembly. The king's go-ahead for the plan was essential. It turned out to be a formality. George III had not forgiven Americans for their treason in taking up arms against him. When Lord North approached him with details of the plot, the king appears almost to have palpitated with glee at the idea of scoring over his former subject. George wrote to Lord North, undoubtedly, the Americans cannot expect nor ever will receive any favor from me, but permitting them to obtain men unworthy to remain in this island, I shall certainly consent to. Moore's ship, the George, was to take the initial shipment. Her name was changed to the Swift, so that in the event of being challenged, he was to say that the Swift was taking the convicts to Nova Scotia. Events moved quickly. 87 male and female convicts from Newgate Prison were the first to be loaded on board. In choosing them, George Moore would have made sure they were skilled craftsmen since they always fetched a good price. They were a mixed bunch. Charles Thomas had been convicted of stealing one wooden tub valued at a penny and 12 pounds weight of butter valued at 5 shillings. Charles Keeling was a former midshipman who admitted stealing a sword. Christopher Trustee was convicted of highway robbery after being caught red-handed holding up a coach. Jane Warwood Shaw was a widow who had been promised leniency for helping constables find some property stolen by her son. In the event, she was sentenced to 14 years transportation. Her son and his partner in crime, each got 7. The Swift made her way downstream to pick up 56 more convicts from Campbell's Hope, the censor, but things were already going wrong. A London merchant whose sympathies were with the Americans got wind of a scheme to ship convicts. He alerted John Jay, leader of the American peace delegation in Paris. It was to take Jay many weeks to get the news to Baltimore. In the meantime, the Swift could have reached America and unloaded her convicts with the American authorities none the wiser. But the voyage was beset with Captain Pam made the mistake of allowing the convicts to learn that if they were not sold in America, they would be sold in Africa. The morning after hearing the news, the convicts mutinied. A group of 6 somehow slipped their chains, led by the highwayman Christopher Trusty and the former midshipman Charles Keeling. They stormed the captain's cabin, where the firearms were kept. With Trusty brandishing a sword over Captain Pomp's head, the convicts took command of the vessel and released the rest of the prisoners. It was a fighting experience, and not just for the crew. Some of the convicts accosted Jane Warwick Shaw, and it seems that only the intervention of Charles Keeling saved her from being raped, and then the captain being robbed. Keeling grabbed a blunderbuss and threatened to use it on his fellow convicts. The Swift was now between Rye and Dungeness. She carried 2 longboats, and the convicts fought between themselves to get a place on them. Several ended up in the sea and drowned. 48 eventually squeezed aboard the boat, leaving about 100 still on the Swift. Among those who got away were Trusty, who knocked down 2 or 3 others to get himself a place, and Charles Keeling. Those left behind found a rum supply and got progressively drunk as they waited for the longboats to return to take them off. The weather now played a hand, but the convicts were persuaded that the wind was so heavy that the ship's survival depended on the crew locked below being allowed back on deck to sail her. The convicts agreed, and some of the crew were released. They took the first chance to turn the tables and regain control of the Swift from their drunken captors. Next morning, with the convicts now safely locked below again, Hap hailed a passing frigate, and she escorted them into Portsmouth. A manhunt for the 48 escapees was set in motion, stretching all the way from the south coast to London. Every constable and magistrate in Kent, Sussex, and the metropolis were alerted. According to some reports, much of Kent was now terrorized by the escapers. In fact, half were quickly recaptured, some after ferocious resistance, the rest vanished. 2 weeks after the mutiny, 24 recaptured men chained to each other went on trial in the Old Bailey's Justice Hall on the capital charge of returning from transportation. Captain Pap sent his first mate, Thomas Bradbury, to give evidence while he prepared the Swift to resume her mission with 90 convicts still aboard. The court case nearly blew the plot out of the water. Charles Keeling claimed from the dock that the Swift's real destination was America. He said that the mutiny had been sparked, threat that they would be dumped in Africa if the American plan went wrong. Bradbury, the mate, denied knowledge of any plan to land in American territory. Sticking to the script laid down by the men behind the block, he insisted that Nova Scotia in Canada was the destination. Naturally, his words was accepted before that of a convict, and the hearing moved on. The moment of danger was past. All 24 escapees were found guilty, but only 6 of them were hanged in Tyburn. Of the others, 17 had their death sentences commuted to transportation for life and 1 to transportation for 14 years. Among those who escaped death was Charles Keeling. His life was saved by testimony regarding his behavior in preventing a rape. Not so fortunate was Christopher Trusty. He was hanged. The following month, the Swift sailed again, carrying about 100 convicts. News of her departure was reported in the Maryland Gazette, putting her destination as Nova Scotia. The plot was evidently holding, and on Christmas Eve, the Swift and her convicts sailed unhindered into Baltimore. Briefly, everything continued to go to plan. Would-be buyers went on board to inspect the merchandise and accepted or chose to accept the convicts as free willers. They appeared to have paid sky-high prices, 35 pounds a head, according to one report, nearly twice that according to another. Presumably, the buyers included those who knew exactly what was going on but were happy to turn a blind eye. The trade in white flesh seemed to have resumed as if there had never been a war. Most Marylanders remained blissfully unaware that convicts were again being dumped on them. This is evident from the gloating piece in the Maryland Gazette in January 1784, which built upon the paper's earlier report that the Swift was shipping convicts to Nova Scotia. The Canadian province was earmarked as a refuge for Americans loyal to King George, and the Gazette rejoiced over them sharing a future with convicts. It wrote of respectable loyalists being obliged to herd with the overflowings of Newgate. Enthused by his first sale, George Salmon wrote to his partner in England, George Moor, telling him to convict. However, winter suddenly descended on Baltimore and everything stopped. Arctic conditions iced in the Swift. Then the news leaked out that the Swift's so-called servants were in fact convicts. There was uproar. Angry buyers and indignant patriots blockaded the Swift so no one could get on or off her. According to one of the convicts, a horse thief called George Townsend, some buyers dumped the men they purchased in the woods, presumably to freeze to death. 60 convicts were stuck on board the ice-bound ship, more and more going down with fever, others threatening to escape. Salmon now faced losing money, and he contemplated dumping the convicts in the woods. In February, he wrote to Moor, "I thought several times it would be almost as good to let the villains go on shore and so have done without them. If I find I cannot sell them for some price or another, I shall turn them adrift." After 5 freezing weeks, a sharp local agent managed to smuggle George Townsend off the Swift and find a gullible buyer, a Quaker. The agent, who probably paid less than 20 pounds for Townsend, asked 90 guineas and got 60. When the Quaker realized Townsend was a convict, he put him on board an English-bound vessel, though, as a return transport. He would be sentenced to hang. Outraged at the British move to dump convicts spread, and in March, Salmon instructed Moore not to send the second shipment, but his letter arrived too late. Moore had dispatched another convict ship called the Mercury in March 1784 with 179 men and women. This time, he took care to guard against mutiny. Special barriers were erected on board to hold back any mutineer, but the precautions were not sufficient. As the Mercury cleared the English Channel, she was taken over by her convicts. The ship was in convict hands for 6 days before she was recaptured. The resulting delay was fatal. By the time she arrived off the American coast, every port in the USA seemed to have been alerted. None would admit her. The Mercury eventually deposited some very sick convicts in Belize. It took 5 years before the importation of convicts was banned by law across the USA, and in that period, 7 convict ships secretly brought their cargoes to America, and at least 2 successfully landed them. However, the Mercury debacle sounded the death knell for the convict trade. It forced the British Parliament to accept that America would never again be the dumping ground for Britain's convicted criminals. In 1785, a parliamentary committee concluded with regret that the ports of the United States have been closed against the importation of convicts. Australia had by then been selected as the alternative. 2 years later, a fleet set out for Botany Bay in New South Wales, carrying a cargo of 750 convicts. Among them were some of those that Britain had desperately tried to offload in America in a last hurrah for the American white slave trade. Although the convict trade was over, white slavery was not. As with convicts, shipments of freewheelers were barred during the war. With the advent of peace, servant ships were back in New York and Boston before the ink was dry on the peace treaty, carrying men and women for sale. The reappearance of the trade scandalized some Americans. In January 1784, while Monsieur Pound and Salmon were in Baltimore trying to pass off the convicts from the Swift as freewheelers, a group of men liberated a consignment of the genuine articles from a ship just docked in New York. The Independent Gazette reported that these New Yorkers considered the indentured system to be contrary to the idea of liberty this country had so happily established, and having freed the servants, they were raising a public subscription to pay for their passage. Hopes of universal liberty were misplaced, however. The prime enslavers, the planter elite from Virginia, were senior partners in the coalition of interests that won the war and would now mold America. The richest planter of them all, slaveholder and servant holder, was to be the first president of the United States, George Washington. Washington's attitude was put to the test at the beginning of the war when the British governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore, promised freedom to servants and slaves who joined his side and fought for King George. The prospect of losing their prime assets enraged the planters, not least Washington. He described Lord Dunmore as an arch traitor to the rights of humanity. It would take 30 years before the indentured servant trade disappeared. It did so as unobstructively as it came in, dying out slowly and without fuss. No principled campaign was fought to end it, as happened with black slavery. Economics killed it. The trade in white servants simply lost its profitability. Advances in ship design made the journey quicker and cheaper and therefore within reach of more of the poor. At the same time, ethnic self-help groups emerged offering loans to would-be migrants from back home. The result was that fewer people needed to mortgage their best years in pursuit of a new life in a new world. By 1820, the trade was gone, and those who connived at it, some of them great names in America and Britain, were remembered for other things. What of the legacy of their victims? Did those convicts and freewheelers and others dealt with so grossly by the indentured servant system leave some definable trace in themselves in the fabric of society they helped to build? The answer is undoubtedly yes, for America grew from their experience just as much as it did from that of others whose stories are more readily told. Is it too fanciful to see something of the harsh conditions of those early settlements, of the backbreaking work in farm and factory within the present-day American psyche with its proud insistence on the work ethic, and in its rigorous penal code with the death penalty still available in so many states? Is it too much to see something of those stern early disciplinarians? One tends to think not. Early America was created out of a series of convulsive efforts so often dependent upon the sacrifice of those who cleared the trees and tilled the soil. These men and women played their peculiar part in the creation of the dual facets of the American dream, the right to individual freedom and the opportunity to make something of oneself. Thousands upon thousands of enslaved workers gave up their freedom or had it taken from them in order that others could make money, while hoping upon hope that one day it would be their turn too. And that ends this chapter and this book. All right, that ends this the reading of this book. I can't believe we went through all, 19 chapters of this book, White Cargo, The Forgotten History of Britain's White Slaves in America. And it certainly tells a story that no one has told before of the true slaves of the United States of America, United States, America, whichever of the versions of the name one wants to use. Nonetheless, it must be understood that the United States of America, or whatever derivative is being used, nothing more than a company, and the Virginia Company, as we found, all companies which today are called states come out of the Virginia Company, and it ought to be observed or recognized that at the beginning and the end of the day, you are talking about a company. We have been mentally conditioned to believe that this is government and that government has the authority to dictate the lives of the people. But as you can see from this book, if you're one of the slaves that came over from Great Britain, they dictated your life. But that was the reason the Constitution was written, so that no one would ever again be able to dictate the lives of another human being. So this was a great book to read. It gave us a piece of history that has never been told. And it also gave us some additional information about this slave trade that no one seems to have told us about. So we have a lot of researching to do. We have a lot more contemplating to do about this information that we read, because this information that was presented in this book, there's so much that needs to be researched, and it can be researched, because the one thing that this book has demonstrated is that they documented exactly who the true slaves were, and are. And they have documented who the lineal descendants of those slaves are. So we can take a lot of these acts that gave detailed accounts of how the slaves are to be treated, and we can show how that treatment is being imposed on the people today. So we have a lot more researching to do. Islam?
Islam.
No.
You know, it's interesting that it's really a information explosion type thing going on, you know, and when you look at it, it's like they didn't, you know, make that readily available, but they did keep records of it. Now, why do you think they didn't tell, even though they do talk about how, for instance, their lineal descendants came over here as free people, quote unquote, through Ellis Island for the most part, and they'll talk about that, and they'll talk about how they came with nothing, but no one ever looked and said, well, why did you come from wherever with nothing? This information here puts that puzzle piece together to explain why they were in the condition they were in and came with nothing. So it all ties it together. But now our people, Moors, who have been coined, Negro, colored, and black around 1774, more specifically, we've been living this life of lie about how we were. It's like they switched the story around. And it's not that we didn't enslave each other, because after the so-called ending of slavery, it really never really ended. We see that now. But even during that time and the Reconstruction and so on, they continued with slave trade, and we participated and allowed the quote-unquote Englishmen to, or assisted the Englishmen to come over to the Ivory Coast and literally kidnap our own people. It became a commodity. So yes, that did happen. And we did become enslaved because the whole slavery thing just became a business. Now, when you think of the psychology of it, is it because these modern Europeans, they never knew anything else? All they knew, they were born into slavery. They were treated, like slaves very badly. And what else could they actually, why did they continue with it and hide it from us here? That's the question to ask. I mean, not that it was really hidden, but it was, because it's not a part of the quote-unquote history per se. Why do you think that happened? Was it to bureaucratize slavery and continue to keep the Aboriginal indigenous people and those who they kidnapped from the coast in slavery? I mean, what's the reason for hiding it? Are you speaking? Because if you are, you're muted, like you usually do.
Yep, I had it muted. I think that it's about trading places and getting the people here to believe that this whole slave trade that's talked about, where thousands and thousands of people were killed in the transportation. I think it's their way of trying to transfer that history from themselves to the Aboriginal indigenous people. But, if we was to just stop and think about it for a minute, we would realize that they were never telling our history or our story. They were always telling theirs, because there really is no, the only record of ships bringing slaves here to this Moroccan American landmass is the slaves that came from Great Britain,
which are them.
Which is them. That's their history. That's not ours.
Got it.
They don't have the the mass slave trade that they talk about that consisted of the Asiatic population. There's no evidence that ever took place. There's no ships. Everything that is there to substantiate a slave trade. It's a slave trade that came from Great Britain,
which would be them.
Yeah.
So they supplanted that story onto us when it was really their story. That's the lie.
And then we have to also keep in mind that the whole Ellis Island, that came much later.
Yes, please.
Much later.
Yes, that's true. Turn of the century, after the 1900s, around that time, and they have congressional records to prove that. And that is an interesting point because those are the lineal descendants of them that came much later. And, it's important for us to understand the importance of lineal descent and how, like we say, oh, this is America the Great and all that. That's what they're saying. This is our homeland. This is our ancestral estate, period. And you're right. They're telling the history from their perspective, and they have all right to do so or to not tell it, others. This is why we have to educate our own people, and that's the one thing that has always been missing. And every discipline you go to, every group, every association, they all say the same thing, including Prophet Noble Ali, that you should have your own schools. And part of that is to, learn what we're learning today and know more about our own history. So it's important. It's very important because if they can hold on to, and that's what they're doing now, they're staunchly holding on to their own survival, their own history, their own family. And inclusive with that is even the Christianity. I mean, all of that is for their earthly salvation. And they have a right to do that because all that lives wants to live. But they're colonists from day one, and they're colonists today. Period.
Let's open up the line and add more people to this discussion because it was an interesting read, the entire book, and it gave a lot of it's crazy because people go to school and really when you look at these institutions that they call school, people need to recognize that they're not really schools. They're just another way for a corporation to receive income. And that's all they're alleging to do is to provide a service. Now, how well are they providing the service is questionable because if they're not, they're giving you some information, but they're not telling you the truth. And really, a school's purpose is to basically just teach how to read, how to write, and how to do simple math. Everything else is on the student. So, but our challenge is, as a people, we've been mentally conditioned to have someone else tell us what is, or someone else do for us. We've been mentally conditioned to be dependent. And so here comes Prophet Noble Ali, and he's telling you, hey, it's time for you to learn how to be independent. And, people don't want to do that, and they're really kicking and screaming and don't want to, figure it out when really you've always been left to figure it out. If it wasn't going to generate income for employees of a company, you were left to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing's changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
can I put one more? No,
go ahead.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
You mentioned King George, I believe the fourth. Another interesting thing to put in there, when you do hear or have heard them talk, they will talk about King George, King Alexander. But what we didn't know is that those were Moors.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, and isn't that interesting? So these studies will lead you to find that out. It's like we put the King George picture and we went and got the source for it because, someone said, oh, that's not King George or whatever, because they couldn't believe that he was a melanated Moor, But that's another interesting piece because all through coming up, when you hear them, I know for me and probably for many, when you would hear them say King George, King Philip, King Alexander, all that, thinking of modern Europeans. And they were not that at all. At all. So there is another study. There's another, I think you had recommended it. It was a series. The only thing is they don't show them as Moors. They show them as modern Europeans. I believe it was either the Borgias or some movie or series.
The Tudors. The Tudors as well as the Borgia. The Tudors tell the story of Henry VIII. And if you have enough keys, you can see that they're talking about an Asiatic, but it's a modern European who is portraying him. And the same thing with Borgia. The Borgia, everybody except for that Pope Alexander the Sixth, I think it was. They were all Moors, but they called him a bastard, and that bastard is code for a modern European, and he was allowed to be a pope, but he was allowed to be a pope by a lot of trickery, poisoning, and outright murdering. And they show you that in this series. But because he was not of noble bloodline, he was never supposed to be allowed to take that position, which is why they were always trying to poison and kill him. Which is why he had to accustom his body to ingesting poison, because they were always trying to poison him.
So
because he was never supposed to be in that position.
All right. So now here's an interesting point there too. Pope Alexander VI, being a bastard, being the code word for meaning that he was not a Moor, he was a modern European. Then he's the one where you go to read the Indica Terra Divina. So he went on a
mission. He's the one that wrote the bull.
All right.
To exterminate the Moors.
To exterminate the Moors. There you go. It all makes sense. All right. Islam.
Yeah. So let's see. We've got caller 719-232, which I think is Bukhari, and caller 623-907, who I think is Assam. And we have caller 313-491. And if there's anyone else who would like to join the discussion, please press 1 on your telephone dial, and we'll take turns discussion. So who else would like to comment on this last chapter of the White Cargo book?
Greetings. This is Brother Bukhari, Model Base, coming to you from Mexham. I have one bar, and I just want to know before I start, am I coming in loud and clear?
Yes, you are.
All right. Hey, well, oh, wow, this is such a powerful book, and I'm struggling to follow up after the many comments, logical comments, sound comments. There's so many great points. What's left for me to talk about? Well, slavery in any form is a sin in my book, and you reap what you sow, and so this whole country today, the fact that this book was written and a few people got together to discuss it on a radio platform is incredible, and I think it's a wonderful thing, and I'm looking forward to the next book. But specific to this book, it's pretty much it just continues to blow me away, and when I think about some of the things that were the foundation for this whole activity, was criminals being sold for profit, criminals doing the selling. A lot of the products were alcohol, tobacco, rum, sugar, cotton, tea, and so this book is outlining treasonous activity, crime from one nation against another nation, human trafficking, to be specific, murder, fraud. I mean, you name it. This small book has encapsulated all of the crime that you could possibly commit under the under the realm of human trafficking. So I think it's a wonderful thing. Excuse me, just one second.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, sorry about that. Little bit of background noise there.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So one of the other things that I found interesting is that frame, which I mentioned on last week's show, and it's funny. It's just so funny how funny, but it's when you start to study begins, right? So don't have all the answers in terms of our history, so to speak, as Moors. But from reading this piece of literature, another thing that it does for the reader, particularly if you're a Moor today, gives you insight into time frames and some of the things that were going on during that time frame that helps to assist you with formulating questions, deciding what the next piece of literature you're going to read is going to be, and then certainly ultimately being able to, through your own and with others, some of the what is referred to as the United States government. They do that. And so with that, I'm just going to yield the floor for now. I don't want to take up all the time.
Islam family. RVBey, Northwest of Mexico. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to give a hearty heart to Annie Eve. It's great hearing her voice once again back on the airways.
Yes.
Wonderful. Yes. And trust all is going well. And to you, Mother Rise, you sound well today. I know last week you had sound like you had a cold or something, but you sound well. So, and to you, Bakari. But what I want to go in on this is, again, the history and the chronological time period that the writer tried to keep in, to make us aware of, because especially when we know that it was dealing with slavery. We know this is how the U.S., this is the history of the U.S., even though it's not our history, it's the history of the U.S. and the United States of America, how they came about, how ratchet and scrupulous to build a whole society on human flesh, on the human being, as and using them as currency, to build a whole society, because what came to mind when Raj brought the question, why would they continue this here, and all the wrong and ratchet, the worst of the worst to a human being they done in order to stand the day under this banner of a Christian society, and the ones who benefit and say that was then and this is now. Like Raj said, why didn't even you, hypocrites, why didn't you address this here not only for your own prodigy and the redemption of their souls, but even the so-called the Moors that was enslaved and enslaved today, and you flip it like that. So I just wanted to sort of say that, because it's just so wretched. You feel reading this here book, you feel one way inside and then another way, and you have to control that emotion, And secondly, the ones that the modern Europeans that was taken from a place where they were put, was taken from there unknowingly, miscrupulously, fraudulently, and set in another place. I'm talking about the ones that were didn't have nothing to do with this here. Where when I was and I want to explain it like this: when I was under a certain unconsciousness, and this was years and years ago when we was learning Black history, and they was talking about going back to Africa, and a lot of the storyline was that we didn't come here on our own; we was forced here on our own, and this, and so you have to deal with this here. A lot of those modern Europeans we see from this writing that was forced here on that with what were brought here against their own will also, and the reason I'm bringing this point, when I read about Prophet Noble Drew Ali, when he talks about the European helping us and why not you, it makes me think of some of the Europeans that know this and outright helping us, for the sake of their own salvation, and so I guess what I'm trying to say, it is some of those Europeans that were mistreated, downtrodden, brought over here against their own will, dealing with fraudulent matters under fraud, and I want to consider them. I don't know what I want to use the word like a good European, you know, for the lack of finding another word right now, because the way that they were mistreated, brought here, and then generationally put in slavery, you know, and and mentally misled, where they didn't understand this thing neither. Now, when we get to the part of them benefiting, though, is a whole nother thing. But I just wanted to make the point, it is some Europeans that are fraudulent and that was brought over here under the false pretense, and they didn't have nothing to do with that. Now, the ones who benefit from that, because it is some today that still is enslaved, just like we had been. Well, they are slaves, but just like we have been enslaved, you know, and mentally trapped, so is a lot of them also. So I just wanted to say that. But then, talking about these dates, when we talk about 1776, and we know what happened during 1776 with this with the Declaration of Independence, all right. But now you have a broader scope. You have a broader scope of the Europeans and what was going on, other than these people fighting the Civil War. Now you understand, you see who they were. A lot of them was those slaves, the modern European slaves, and Irish and Scottish slaves that they enlisted, drafted into the fight this here war, and unknowingly again tricked in fraudulently in a situation, didn't even know what they was fighting for. A lot of them, you know, it was just a way to make a living at that time, because, you know, they didn't have nothing to do with the slave trade. It was the elite that was making plans and things like that, you know. So I'm hoping I'm not all over the place with that, because I didn't gather my thoughts to formate them in such a way. But these dates, and then we got in January of 1784, when the Maryland Gazette, and we knew during that time that was the Continental Congress. We knew that was the the Articles of Association, all right, and the Articles of Confederation. We know that this was that time leading up to the Constitution for the United States of America. So, and all this was going on at this time, and it was two books that I was looking at, like when scholars be writing these books, and one of the books that he referenced here was Before the Mayflower, the history of the Negroes in America from 1619 to 1964. And it was another one that I ordered. It was the Black Laws of Virginia. And that's another one that he referenced in gathering his information, you know, because we do want to check behind some of these scholars, you know, just because what's written in there, it might sound good and it brings us this here. We do want to see where he got his information, some of his information from. So we've been checking some of those books. And so it's been pretty good. It held up pretty good, that we can say, like you said earlier, we never knew this history, and you had these Europeans writing this history, writing their own history to make their own people aware of their history and keeping their history there, even though a lot of us never knew. But like this here book was out there, and like I see some of the dates of these other books that was out there in 84, 67, and so this history is out there, and we bringing this thing together. Like Bakari said, you guys gathering this here and bringing this here knowledge to the people, to the family. It should make us do a few things. One, if you read this here and you understand this, and then if this indeed their history, and now that you're reading it, you know it's not no ghetto fairy tales or people telling you know the street, just the story on the corner about how brutal this modern European can be, and you can read this here thing as evidence, and you come to and you believe this here. You better know that if we ain't getting ourselves together, and that this is really what's happening now, even though we see that the penal system down, a lot of times you don't go in there, and now they are treating you, it appears to be treating you better physically than back then, the way that they treated the people back then that was locked up in those penal colonies and in those penitentiaries or those prisons. And now they give you, you go to these prisons and they make it like I don't want to use the word country club, but a country club compared to what it was then. But it's all about capturing your mind and putting you to sleep mentally. And I believe for those who don't understand and read these books and what we see today, if you don't wake up and get this here, you will almost be, it gives me a feeling like you will be asleep for eternity. If you don't wake up and get this here, and you don't see this here, and you don't see that this is just an extension of the past, what we going on right now, and it's a mental and spiritual war. You know, not so much like the physical thing, even though the way things might be, you know, you might see it, you know, on that physical level, especially in the past 10 years, so many Moors that you seen that was accosted and killed by a lot of these highwaymen and things like that. If you don't mentally get this thing together and read these books and understand that this is their history, and they writing and they letting you know it was their history. It ain't like, you know, brothers is on the corner talking about, yo, this is what they do. This is written down in black and white, and this is their history. And you don't come to want to do anything. So I can see why the avatars and the prophets and things wept and cried and for their people. If this don't get you to moving and getting you to do anything, you know, I don't know what will.
I hear you with them the whole time that you were saying this with them. This part about it, they don't get it. I think that can contribute to some of us and some of those that are listening when they feel weary or they feel like, oh, my gosh, you know, our people are in such need. How do I help them? I think that what you just said really kind of like lends towards why sometimes you feel that way, because you're absolutely correct. Because this is about being who you are. And that means knowing who you are. And that means knowing truth about the history, such as being unveiled here about not just yourself, but for them. Because if we know who they are, then we easily know who we are as well, because it's all the, histories combined. It's about humanity. You know what I'm saying? And I think what you said hit on how sometimes you might say to yourself, "Dang, am I being impatient, or am I being insensitive?" Or some people say, "Oh my gosh, you got to help our." What the truth is what you just said. We all have to know the truth about these things that the history. That means you have to get that knowledge. If you're getting it by listening to the books that we're going to be reading, or someone else reads, or that you read, fine. But yeah.
That's right. Yeah. That's right, because it was a group of people that seen this like we just talking and what we're saying right now, and they saying, listen, we got to put something together. We got to put this Constitution together, and we better hurry up and put this thing together so it can be some kind of protection, so it be something written, it be some kind of remedy on the face of the earth for these people that's doing this here, these corporations. Remember, these corporations don't bleed, they don't pray, they don't sleep. They attack, they set these policies in force, and they attack you 24/7. These corporations. So understand the beast of this corporation also that, that you guys has been bringing, the understanding of just this history, the History and Heritage School that's been bringing you the understanding of this corporation. Understand it ain't just something that was for trade, and I mean, it's a beast. The people that set up and that's behind it set up this corporation to do this here commerce. You can see that it becomes beastified, and I can see why they call it a certain kind of entity, in the sense of when you put some policies together and you put this corporation together, and then how this policy that they put on paper, and these people, some ignorant and some knowledgeable of the policy, and it puts it in force. It's almost like it becomes a machine, and it's treacherous, and it's so. Oh man, I don't know if I'm coming across with this thing or not, but these corporations and what these companies and corporations do, like some of them is set up for the good, but then it is what that is, a corporation that you can create, and it set up policies, and in that policy that they set up, how vicious it can, so that it can be a means to an end. And that end is wiping you off the face of the earth, to try to do that. But it never was a time when we were not. But, it's just vicious. So the ending of this here chapter, with chapter 19, is horrible. But at the same time, to let you know, they set up that penal system and that penitentiary, and that thing right there, when it comes to our young Moorish men, and now you're seeing the statistics growing of the young Moorish women that they are collecting and locking away in this penal system that they set up from day one when they stepped on this land. It's beastified. It's beastified. So I yield to. I'm going to yield the floor with that. I don't even. If whatever I said, because then I was just talking from my feelings and things like that. This thing is beastified.
Well, what happened if you look at the information that was in this book, see this whole thing. It doesn't matter, is this that people they might want to they get you to a place of comfort by getting you to believe that they are your friend, because it's easier to control people when they think you and them are friends or that you have something in common. But the reality of the situation is these are corporations. Their sole objective is to generate income. And that is it. It's not personal. It's business for them. It's business all the time. The business never stops. So now when you look at this book, it was business for them. And their product was modern Europeans who were expendable. So it was nothing for them to just work them to death or outright kill them, because they had a steady supply. It was and it was very it was a prop. They've said it so many times in this book. It was very profitable. All right. Now today, human trafficking, obvious human trafficking, is not a good look. Listen to what I'm saying. Obvious human trafficking is not a good look. Doesn't mean it's not happening. It just means that it doesn't look good if it is obvious to everyone. So, when these modern Europeans came over here, they needed to establish their corporation and they needed to maintain their sales territory. That took place. Today, they don't have a product. They don't provide a service per se. So they had to figure out a way to continue to receive income outside of what was their cash crop at the time, which was the tobacco, because they don't understand agriculture, and so the tobacco industry is not what it used to be, and they have so stripped the land of nutrients that tobacco doesn't grow the way it used to grow. So they had to find another source of income. And that's where keeping people alive rather than killing them became profitable. Now they have prisons all over the place. And if you pool your resources, if a few people pool their resources, they can build a prison, submit what is it called? They can submit a proposal. They can submit a proposal to provide a service, and they will get income. And the service that they're going to provide is to in the chapter before this chapter, I believe it talked about how they established an act to prevent crime, and crime could be classified as anything. That's what's going on today, because these corporations don't have a product or a service. The only way they can have a product or a service is if they bring the resources, and none of them brought the resources, because all of them, the ones who were the slaves and the ones who were, mistreating the slaves, all of them were slaves. They built a system of slaves enslaving slaves. And today, the lineal descendants of those slaves, they have diversified because they don't have a product or a service. Diversified, whereas they can submit a proposal to provide a service, and they've done all sorts of services. They submitted a proposal to educate the population, and they established schools. They submitted a proposal to police the streets, and they established a police department. They submitted a proposal to, build and maintain a prison for criminals. Criminals can be anything, as this book let every one of us who paid attention see. A criminal can be anything. It doesn't mean that you are a criminal or a crime was committed. But in order to substantiate the receiving of the income, they have to substantiate that there is a crime that was committed. No crime has been committed, but the paperwork states a crime was committed. Therefore, we had to build this prison. Therefore, we needed to hire people to monitor the prisoners. Therefore, this income, this federal funding is still needed. Because every one of these companies, specifically the municipal corporations, all income that they receive is federal dollars because they don't have a product or a service anymore. And it's exasperated. They're imposing these policies on the private sector when it was only supposed to be imposed on corporate employees, because the corporate employees, they are the only ones that are receiving a privilege benefit. They're receiving the privilege and or benefit in conducting business on this landmass for profit. That's a benefit and a privilege. So when you look at all of these so-called laws, which are not laws, they're corporate policies and procedures, right up to Obama's travel ban, which, by the way, was just sanctioned by some Supreme Court justice. His travel ban is basically saying we got a business to run. We don't want nobody who's contrary to our business being able to come into this landmass and interfere with how our business is conducted or how our business is run. That doesn't mean that they might do that, but they don't. But they're hedging the potential. So they're saying these are the people who have the potential to interfere with our business, and so we're not going to allow them in. This is a business move. Now, the problem with the people around the world is they are acting like a corporate policy applies to private sector. That's the problem. People don't know that they're not a part of the policies and procedures that are going on even as we speak regarding corporate activity around the world. If there is a law somewhere that says employees of a company or corporation can regulate the activity of the people, somebody needs to produce it. And it doesn't exist. I know it doesn't exist. But if somebody thinks it exists, and I'm not taught, I want clear language. I don't want vague language. I want actions of people in a non-commercial private capacity. Show me the law. Show me the written documentation of that. Because other than that, doing is you're violating people's liberty. And I'll say this, and then I'll yield the floor. For all of those people who have been injured, their liberties violated in one way or another by employees of a municipal corporation, and they are possibly being held a prisoner or was injured by any employee of a municipal corporation. The reason this continues is because nobody sues. I'm going to ask you to watch a movie, if you haven't. Watch a movie called Aaron Brockovich. Now, it doesn't have anything to do with prisoners, police, but what it does have everything to do with is employees of a corporation who blatantly violate the liberties of the people to the point where vast numbers of people got sick and died, and livestock died, and all because this corporation was in business and wanted to continue doing business and didn't care that they were polluting the land and the water at the people's expense. And what was significant about this movie is that over 600 people got together and sued the company and won. Even if it was one, the point that I am making is that if you don't sue the corporation for violating your liberties, you're never going to get any remedy. And you can sit there and whine with your thumb in your mouth all day long. It's not going to change anything. It's your obligation to sue if you feel that your liberties have been violated. If you think the very people who violated your liberties are going to come to your front door, ring the doorbell, and apologize and leave you a check and walk away and never bother you again, that is some la-la land business right there that never existed. Maybe it will exist sometime in the future, but right now it doesn't. You have to step up. You know what Bob Marley says, stand up for your rights? Well, stop sitting down and whining. Stand up for your rights and do what needs to get done. If you don't want to do that, then you need to just be quiet. With that, I yield the floor.
Islam. This is Brother Bukhari. Before I make any comments, I want to check with Mother Roz. Should I just table it for a second or wait? Or go ahead?
What are you asking? Yeah, what are you asking?
I have a comment that I'd like to make, but I didn't want to jump in case you wanted somebody give somebody else a shot at the floor.
Oh, I thought you had mentioned.
I just added another caller 228-627. You are unmuted if you wanted to comment.
Islam, not at the moment. I'm doing fine, just listening.
All righty. So, Bukhari, you have the floor.
Thank you. And I just want to also say it's good to hear your voice again on the show, Mother Anna Eid.
Thank you.
Yeah. I want to say that so many things, so many wonderful points that have been brought to the attention of the people. I think that this book and others like it should be found, and things like this should be going on all over the planet, not just on MHHS, because this doesn't cost you anything. It may cost you something to purchase an item, pick something up or whatever, but to go over it, read about it, and discuss it, it just opens up so many different avenues in your mind. One of the things that strikes me listening to everyone comment is that something that I would want to do, I would want to see if there are other texts out there by other authors of the time that have similar information, kind of like back it up, corroborate it.
In this book, they have a bibliography. It's like another book. So
yeah.
everything that was referenced in this book it's either coming from state record or other books that are they're corroborated, but it has an extensive bibliography. Everything is like it's got a notes section. Everything is like referenced in here. So if you're looking for something, that's all you gotta do is go to the back of the book. I mean, if
right.
you're looking for where they got the information, that's all you have to do is go to the notes section, and everything that they reference for each chapter. There's a subscript numbering system, and it'll tell you where they got it from. And then if you go to the back, you'll see every book, every reference that they got it from. It's all there. So we don't really have to go and look and try to figure it out, because they already did it for us.
Right, and I was kind of like just mentioning that as a kind of like an FYI, because what usually happens, when something like this happens is, there's a bunch of people who, for whatever reasons, don't want to discuss it properly, or they'll downplay it. And so the other thing that I wanted to point out was that people should also, and I think Brother Asim touched on this, is that when you look into the mentality of these individuals and how they came into this type of activity on this continent, and when I say these individuals, I'm referring to the individuals who were enslaving people and who were running these plantations. Regardless of whether or not they were taking instruction from across the pond, they were in fact implementing it and running it. Why I'm mentioning it that it's because some of the policies that they utilize in order to keep people in line have been passed down from generation to generation, and so that should give you that should give you somewhat of an insight as to the mentality of the individuals who are currently running the show. And perhaps that would also, if you use that same stream of logic, give you some insight as to why certain corporate, institutions were, purchasing millions of rounds of 9mm a couple of years ago. So that's gonna, that's letting you know that before this stuff finally, bottoms out, they're not going down without a fight. You can believe that, because they lost a lot coming over here, and they gained a lot in a short period of time. But it was never theirs to, there was nothing that they did over here on this continent, northwest of Mexico, that was lawful to begin with. And I think that that's the other thing that I would like to say quickly before that I end the floor is that if you comprehend some of the salient points of this book and what it means, why it took place, how it took place, then it's easy for you to come to the conclusion that these people have no lawful say in terms of telling anybody to do anything on this continent. All right? But having said that, you need to be able to look through different time frames throughout history. And I know that I keep going back to this. Brother Asim touches on it. Many other Moors have touched on it. Anna Eid, RVBey have touched on it. And so I'll yield the floor on that. Salam.
I just want to make one little comment about something that Bakari just said on the onset. You're right about people who just don't want to believe it. This is part of the mental slavery and the training and miseducation and then the mental slavery that we're put in. But that point was made also. We experienced that when we put up the picture of King George and people were doubting it. So we went and got the source. And the source of that photo that's on the site of him was in London, so we at the museum. So we put back on the site exactly where it came from, but of course you'd have to go to London to that museum to, see it with your own eyes on the wall. But we figured that people could at least write there and possibly get a copy or whatever. So yeah, we do get that part about people not wanting to believe it. However, this is for those who have eyes to see and ears to listen, and that's just the way that it is, and we just got to keep doing what we do. Islam.
Oh, yeah. Another thing that it makes me think about, first of all, Islam to that. Another thing that to dovetail off of that is it makes me think about, it doesn't surprise you. Like when you read these types of things, it doesn't surprise you when you look at how people, regardless of what they call themselves, generally speaking, it's poorer people of the land, so-called poorer people without access to resources. But when you see how we're treated today in 2017, it surprises you because of what was done back then to set the whole thing. All of the things that were done. So that's another thing that changes when you start coming into this information. And I don't want to jump tracks. I'm not a psychologist or psychologist, but I'm simply saying that when you comprehend and when you read, I think this is another wonderful example of what the Prophet meant by study. Because nothing is going to bring consciousness to you quicker than studying. You can talk about melanin and pineal gland and, purge yourself and all of the things, wonderful things to know about. But if you don't study, if you don't use that brain, that gray matter, it's time. So it's this type of literature just shows, and there's so many things that this can do. Hopefully we'll get at least 600 people throwing that out to Anna Eid there. Well, hopefully we'll get at least 600 people that will want to read this just from tonight's broadcast. I yield the floor.
All right. Let's see. Okay, now we have another caller. We're adding caller 320309. Do you have a comment that you wanted to add regarding the book we're reading, or we just read?
Islam family. This is Inyan RVBey, Northwest New Mexico, Minnesota territory. Good evening to you, Sister Roz Mariah, and it's great to hear you back, Sister Annie L. So glad that you're here this evening. We got the dynamic duo back at it again, alhamdulillah. Well, what I wanted to say was that from the start of you reading this book up until this point, there's been so many things to consider. There are so many things that historically correlate to the accounts given in the book. You think of from the inception of the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, there weren't that many of them here. And so you had the mass campaign of kidnapping people, trying to boost the population. And then you as you read about the Virginia Company and who actually worked these plantations, and you get to see who is who and what is what, because when you consider this white cargo and you look at the Declaration of Independence, like the brother said earlier this evening, you realize, well, if you're a free man or woman and you know you are, would you really be at all concerned about signing a Declaration of Independence? No, you wouldn't. So what were you before that document? And all these things were considered as I listened to you and Annie to read this book. And then you also left to consider, well, if all that's going on, what was Ellis Island really about? Because they were still bringing more immigrants over here. And I began to think about the Mantis 29 view video where you and Miss Reed were at that museum in Washington. And they gave you the 5 points: the conquering, the cultivating, the immigrating, the slavery, and the annexation. And along the way, as time went on, you could see that they were clearly in a haste to somehow obscure this history of theirs. You have the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan that to threat the rest and coercion or terror, getting people to trade places with them. You have Walter A. Flecker misclassifying people. All this is this campaign to obscure the history and to make you believe that you're somebody else. Because when you put the pieces of the puzzle together, this whole thing falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's when you have people complain about why don't you teach our history in school, you're out of your mind if you think this person is going to teach you who you are when he's too busy trying to obscure his own tracks. I'm going to take time to teach you who you are, because along the lines of him doing that, you're going to find out who he really is. And all of these things are just so much to consider with all of this information. And like you say, if you got ears to hear and eyes to see, you can easily see the historic correlations that qualify the material information given in white cargo. Well, that's all I wanted to say. But I'm going to yield the floor. And once again, Anita, it was so great to have you back. All right, family. I'm going to yield the floor as well.
All right. Well, I think we have covered a lot, and there's more that can be covered or researched and dissected in this book. There's go and see if I can pull up, certain acts that they talk about. These are not American acts. These are English acts. But I would like to see if I can pull it up and read more into it, because one of the things that I know from a perspective of law is you can't just say something, because that's slander and hearsay and it's inadmissible. But if you could say something and back it up with documentation, well, now you have something. And one of the things that this book did, it gave a lot of substantial documentation that we can use, all of us, not just Moors, modern Europeans as well. Everybody on this landmass, their liberties are violated on a daily basis. It's not just Moors. This is the type of information that we could use to substantiate, show, and prove that they're not on this Moroccan American soil. They're practicing English law, and that English law is human trafficking. I mean, we can do that without this documentation, because people have testimony. People are going to have to document their testimony, or they're going to have to write out their cause of action. Till you do that, you don't have a voice. Until you do that, you're not standing up for your rights. And until you do that, you don't have any rights. So I would suggest that we go back and read the Prophet's work, because all of what is happening right now, it is a prophecy in action. It is already in motion. Many of us, we read the prophecies and the statements of Noble Drew Ali, and we think, oh, that's coming. No, that's here. And many have been fulfilled. So read them again, because what is happening is a prophecy in motion, being fulfilled. And if you don't want to be part of that number being the prophecy that is fulfilled, then you need to do some changing within yourself. So with that, I'm going to conclude this broadcast, because we've said a lot, and there's still a lot more to be looked into. Our next book that we're going to be reading, actually you can find it as a free PDF on the website. I will be adding a link when we come back, I believe the day of this month. The book is entitled They Were White and They Were Slaves. You can get it from Amazon. It's a fairly slim book. It's not as big as the White Cargo book, but it's maybe half that size. You can order it from Amazon, or you can Google it and download the PDF. They Were White and They Were Slaves. And we'll see you next week, Tuesday, for Principles of Nationality in Action. And then next Wednesday we'll be at the National Theater, live in the flesh. Thank you so much for joining us, reading with us, talking with us, paying attention, commenting, following along with this reading, the Circle of Readers episode, and the reading of White Cargo. And peace and love to you.
Peace and love.
What's good, y'all? It's called, I've been very, very, very frustrated with Europeans, with people that look like me and who share an ancestral lineage with me. My primary frustration is we've been so severely miseducated, we don't know how to think. And we've been stripped of our ability to use logic and reason. Also, we sit on a pedestal of slavery and colonization, and we sit so high, even those of us who are busting our ass all day, every day, working nonstop, we sit so high on a pedestal of slavery that we can't even see the world for what it truly is. And if we had the gun to our head or the threat of rape at our doorstep every day, we would feel the same sense of urgency that the rest of the world feels, or that colonized peoples who are confined to these artificial borders of the United States feel. So let's be very clear. This land is not the Europeans. It never has been. It never will be. What's going down in Standing Rock, what's going down with this new administration is a continuation of 600 years of colonial theft. And I think there's only one example I can think of that really illustrates this. I was talking to a 7-year-old in my family a couple weeks ago, and we were actually talking about this very thing, about stealing land from the indigenous people. And the 7-year-old goes, nobody's taking my land, European kid, by the way. Nobody's taking my land. I got a gun. I said, you ain't got no gun. He said, I got a 45. I said, you don't have a 45. He said, no, I got a Nerf gun. I said, okay. Let me break this down for you then. Let's say Lil Ricky, 2 houses down, comes and steals your Nerf gun. Is that his Nerf gun? He was like, no, it's my Nerf gun. He stole that from me. I was like, word. Well, it's his now, so deal with it. Ricky grows up, has a kid, and gives that Nerf gun to that kid. Now, is it that kid's Nerf gun? He said, no, it's still my Nerf gun. He took it from me. I said, he didn't take it from you. His dad did. He's only known that Nerf gun was his whole life. How could you take that back from him? He's like, nah, it's mine. I want it back. I said, okay, fine. Let's play this out a little bit longer. So Lil Ricky's kid has a kid when he gets older, and he gives him that Nerf gun. Is it still your Nerf gun? He was like, yeah, it's always been my Nerf gun. Just because he passed it along to a different guy doesn't mean that it's not mine. I said, well, then perfect. This isn't our land. It never has been. It never will be. And until we return it, any sort of solidarity that we feel with black and indigenous people is a fucking joke. Unless you're willing to give back what you never earned, you are a opportunist and a liar. And if you are not even willing to admit that this isn't ours in the first place, you're a fool. And I'm not saying this, maybe I'm saying this because I'm fucking frustrated. And I am, because you guys are better than this. If a 7-year-old can figure out this logic, then y'all can figure this out. And I want more for you. I believe that we have the ability to fucking think. We have the ability to say, oh shit, okay, yeah, it's getting hot out here. It's getting very, very hot. There's clearly something wrong. Oh wait, I'm in the middle of this? Oh, maybe I have some sort of responsibility here. Maybe I have some sort of responsibility. Oh, literally every article of clothing I have, literally every piece of food I eat is stolen? Damn. And the people who are mining these raw materials, who are sowing these goods, who are harvesting these foods, they're not even able to eat these foods? They're not even able to wear clothes or have shoes? You got to be kidding me, man. None of you are that selfish. I hope none of you are that selfish, man. None of this shit is ours. We got to give it back. I mean, I was taught that my whole life. How was I raised in a Christian society that taught me, thou shalt not steal? And yet everything we have is stolen, and we're unwilling to give it back. And I understand you said I bought this, I worked hard my whole life to buy this. Sure, you might have worked your entire life. You might have busted your ass. I know I've busted my ass to the point that my body has failed me time and time again. What I do also know is that I'm driving a car right now. And as hard as I worked for the car that I drive in, I did not mine any of the raw materials to make this car. I didn't slave away on a rubber plantation so that I could have these wheels, right? And even if I worked in a factory in the U.S., which I've worked in warehouses, but even if I worked in a factory, I got a union job with a pension, with yada yada health insurance, all these other amenities. I might be doing backbreaking work, but it's certainly not like those who are slaving away in mines, who are having the threat of rape and murder at their doorstep all day, every day. So I know I sounded frustrated. Most of you usually probably see me more composed. Fuck it. It's urgent. We have to change our ways right now. This world cannot take us exploiting it any longer, and the peoples of this world will not take us doing this any longer. If you want to build with me more, I'm going to be at the station tonight at 7 o'clock. This is January 25th, just in case you watch this on another day, so don't come the next day. But I'll be at the station tonight with my Uhuru Solidarity comrades. We work under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party to build a new and better world that is not rooted in the slavery and oppression of every single person on this planet, but is rather rooted in self-determination, every individual, every people's right to determine their own destiny. So Uhuru means freedom. I'm going to leave you with that. Uhuru, y'all. Peace. Wait, no. Fuck peace.